It all began during one of the busiest times of the year, around Christmas and New Year's, a period when my family restaurant was running at full capacity every night. To fully understand how this night turned into one of the most satisfying moments of my life, let me give you some context. This restaurant has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandparents, Italian immigrants, established it in Canada back in the 1970s. It started as a humble neighborhood eatery, with my grandparents working tirelessly to build it up. Over the decades, my parents expanded the business, turning it into a staple of the community. When they retired, they passed the reins to me. Running the restaurant was no easy task. I wanted to honor the legacy of my family while also modernizing it for a new generation. I renovated the space, updated the menu, and rebranded with a fresh logo. I even launched a marketing campaign, reaching out to food critics, bloggers, and vloggers to spread the word. It was a risk, one that involved taking out a massive loan, but eventually, the hard work paid off. At first, business was slow, and I worried I'd made a colossal mistake. But after a local YouTuber featured us in one of their videos, we began seeing a surge in customers. Soon, we became a hotspot, attracting everyone from foodies to celebrities. By the time the holidays rolled around, we were one of the most sought-after dining destinations in the area. People made reservations months in advance just to secure a table during December. Despite being the owner, I've always taken a hands-on approach. I'm not the type to sit back in an office while everyone else does the hard work. On any given night, you might find me greeting guests at the door, bussing tables, or even mopping the floor after closing time. During high-profile events, I dress the part, donning a tailored jacket and managing the floor to ensure everything runs smoothly. On this particular evening, we were fully booked, as usual. The restaurant was buzzing with the holiday crowd, and I was stationed at the entrance, welcoming guests. That's when they walked in, 6 young women, led by the queen of the group, Karen. Karen was impossible to miss. She was dressed to the nines, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, and her demeanor radiating entitlement. She looked to be in her mid-20s, while her entourage seemed slightly younger. Judging by their matching designer handbags and the way they deferred to Karen, I guessed she was an older sorority sister treating some younger pledges to a night out. As they approached, Karen was loudly bragging to her friends about how amazing this restaurant was. "The food here is to die for," she gushed, "and you never know who you might see. Last time I was here, there were so many celebrities." When she reached the podium, she gave me a once-over and said, "We need a table for 6. "Of course," I replied, maintaining my professional demeanor. "Do you have a reservation?" Karen frowned as if the question was beneath her. "Oh, I didn't make one," she said breezily, "but that's fine. The owner is a personal friend of mine. He always keeps a table open for me. Just let him know Karen is here." I stared at her, fighting the urge to laugh. The owner? Her personal friend? That was news to me, considering I am the owner and had never seen her in my life. But instead of calling her out on her lie, I decided to play along. "I see," I said, pretending to consult the reservation list. "Unfortunately, we're fully booked tonight, and I don't see your name here." Karen's expression darkened. "Are you seriously going to make me call him?" she snapped. "Do you know who I am? I could have your job for this." Behind her, one of her friends muttered, "This guy is so clueless," while another pulled out her phone to snap a picture of me. "Let's send this to the owner," she giggled, "and get this idiot fired." Karen leaned closer, her voice dripping with condescension. "Look, I'm trying to be nice here. You can either give us the table, or I can make your life very difficult. This is not worth losing your job over." Her arrogance was astounding. I had 3 options. 1. Reveal my identity and embarrass her on the spot. 2. Politely refuse and let her walk out. 3. Teach her a lesson she'd never forget. I chose option 3. Feigning submission, I plastered on a smile. "Of course, ma'am," I said. "Let me see what I can do." I led them to one of our VIP tables, a spot reserved for high-profile guests and celebrities. These tables are tucked away in a private area, with a dedicated server and a premium menu. What Karen didn't know was that these tables come with a hefty price tag, thousands of dollars just to book. "Here you are," I said, pulling out a chair for her. "I apologize for the misunderstanding earlier. As a gesture of goodwill, the first 3 rounds of drinks are on the house." Karen smirked, clearly pleased with herself. "I told you it would work out," she said to her friends. "These people are so easy to handle." Before leaving, I informed her of our policy: we require a credit card and ID on file for all VIP bookings. She handed them over without hesitation, declaring, "Tonight's on me, girls." Little did she know what she'd just signed up for. With Karen and her crew settled at the VIP table, I set the plan in motion. The VIP section had its own menu, one that didn't list prices. This was intentional. The items on this menu were exclusive, featuring dishes like imported West Coast oysters, white truffle risotto, and caviar-topped delicacies. Drinks were similarly upscale, with a curated list of high-end cocktails and rare wines. After taking their drink orders, I instructed the bartender to prepare the most extravagant cocktails from the menu. These weren't your typical rum and cokes, each one cost upwards of $50, crafted with premium spirits and garnished with things like edible gold and hand-carved ice. Karen and her friends eagerly accepted the drinks, laughing and snapping pictures for social media. The first 3 rounds were free, as I had promised, but after that, everything was charged at full price. The girls didn't seem to notice, or care. "Another round," Karen called out, raising her glass. Her friends cheered, already tipsy from the potent cocktails. When it came time to order food, Karen went all out. "We'll have the oysters to start," she said, barely glancing at the menu. "And the truffle pasta. Oh, and bring us a couple of those caviar plates. What do you girls want?" Her friends chimed in, adding their own selections: lobster, wagyu beef, and more. The table quickly became a display of decadence, with platters of food arriving one after another. "Wow, this place really is amazing," one of the girls said, snapping a picture of the spread. As the evening wore on, their behavior became increasingly obnoxious. They shouted over each other, spilled drinks on the table, and made snide comments about the staff. At one point, one of Karen's friends turned to me and asked, "Do you ever get tired of being just a waiter? Like, don't you want to do something meaningful with your life?" I smiled politely but said nothing. Inside, I was seething. Meanwhile, Karen was basking in her self-proclaimed glory, loudly telling her friends about all the celebrities she claimed to know. "Oh, this one time, I was at this club in LA, and Chris Hemsworth totally looked at me. Like, we made eye contact for a solid 5 seconds." Her friends oohed and awed, hanging on to her every word. The drinks kept flowing, and the girls were clearly starting to feel the effects. By the time their main courses arrived, they were more interested in taking selfies than actually eating. Throughout the night, I kept a mental tally of their tab. The VIP table itself came with a $1,500 minimum spend, but they had far surpassed that. Between the high-end cocktails and the exorbitantly priced menu items, their bill was climbing rapidly. By the time dessert rolled around, Karen and her crew were thoroughly intoxicated. They ordered several rounds of after-dinner drinks, including expensive cognac and dessert wines. The table was littered with half-empty glasses, uneaten food, and crumpled napkins. When I finally presented the bill, it came to $4,232.23, including tax and a mandatory gratuity for VIP service. I placed the check in front of Karen with a polite smile. "Here's your bill, ma'am. Thank you for dining with us tonight." Karen blinked at the total, her face quickly turning pale. This has to be a mistake, she stammered. I feigned concern. Let me double-check that for you. I took the bill back, pretended to review it, and returned moments later. No mistake, I said cheerfully. Everything is correct. Karen's friends leaned over to look at the bill, their drunken smiles fading. Oh my God, one of them whispered. That's so much money. Karen's bravado crumbled. I didn't realize it would be this expensive, she said, her voice shaking. You didn't tell us the prices. The VIP menu doesn't list prices, I explained, keeping my tone neutral. But as the owner's personal guest, I assumed you were aware of the costs. Her eyes widened. The owner? I nodded. Yes. You mentioned you were friends with him. She opened her mouth to argue but quickly closed it. Her friends were staring at her, waiting for her to fix the situation. I need to speak to the owner, she said finally. There's no way he'd charge me this much. I folded my arms. You're speaking to him. For a moment, there was silence. Karen's friends looked at her, then at me, then back at her. You? Karen said weakly. Yes, I said, dropping the polite facade. I'm the owner. My family has run this restaurant for 3 generations. I've been working here since I was a teenager, and I've never met you before tonight. Karen's face turned bright red. I didn't mean. Save it, I interrupted. You lied to get a table, insulted my staff, and racked up a bill that you now can't pay. If you don't settle this right now, I'll be forced to involve the authorities. One of her friends leaned over and whispered, Do you think they're serious? Like, can they call the cops? Yes, I can, I said, making sure they could all hear me. We have your credit card and ID on file. If you try to leave without paying, that's theft. Karen looked like she was on the verge of tears. She pulled out her phone, scrolling frantically through her messages. I'll call the owner, she mumbled, clearly flustered. Go ahead, I said. She hesitated, then put the phone down. This is ridiculous, she muttered. Here's what's going to happen, I said firmly. You're going to pay your bill. If you can't, you can call someone to come down here and pay it for you. But you're not leaving until this is settled. Once Karen and her entourage were seated at the VIP table, I made it a point to provide them with the best service, at least on the surface. I personally delivered their menus, which were different from the standard ones we use for regular guests. These special menus are a little trade secret in the restaurant industry. They're designed for high-end clientele, offering premium dishes like imported West Coast oysters, white truffle pasta, and black caviar, all at exorbitant prices. There are no listed prices on these menus, only descriptions of the dishes. The group didn't seem to notice. Karen's confidence radiated as she ordered drinks for everyone. We'll start with a round of your signature cocktails, she announced. Make them strong. Of course, I said with a smile. And don't forget, your first 3 rounds are on the house. That's all they needed to hear. By the time the first round of cocktails arrived, Karen and her friends were already discussing what they would order for their meal. They didn't hold back, choosing the most expensive items on the menu without a second thought. Let's do the oysters for the table, one of them suggested, to murmurs of approval. Karen waved her hand dismissively. Obviously. And we'll take the truffle pasta, the ribeye, and, oh, do you have lobster tonight? Yes, I replied. We have fresh Atlantic lobster, flown in this morning. Perfect, she said. We'll take 2. As the orders piled up, I made sure to emphasize how busy we were that evening. It might take a little longer than usual to prepare your food, I said. But in the meantime, can I bring you another round of drinks? Karen smirked. Keep them coming. By the time their appetizers arrived, they had already gone through 3 rounds of cocktails, a bottle of champagne, and a few glasses of wine. I kept refilling their glasses, knowing full well that their tabs were climbing higher and higher. They didn't seem to care, or perhaps they were too tipsy to notice. The attitude from Karen's group only got worse as the night went on. One of her friends, a girl I'll call Baby Karen, leaned over to me as I served their salads. "Do you ever get tired of this?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake curiosity. "Tired of what?" I replied. "You know, just waiting tables," she said. "Like, don't you ever think about doing something more meaningful with your life?" I stared at her for a moment, resisting the urge to tell her off. Instead, I smiled and said, "Well, I enjoy what I do. It's not just a job, it's a family legacy." She said, clearly unimpressed. "I guess that's one way to look at it." The rest of the group giggled, whispering among themselves as if they were in on some private joke. Karen, meanwhile, was busy scrolling through her phone, paying no attention to what was going on. Their main courses arrived after another 2 rounds of drinks. By this point, they were loud, obnoxious, and clearly intoxicated. Karen snapped her fingers at me, demanding more water for the table. Another Baby Karen complained that her steak wasn't cooked the way she liked it, even though she had ordered it medium rare. "This is basically raw," she whined, poking at the perfectly cooked meat with her fork. "I'll take care of it," I said, taking the plate back to the kitchen. Of course, I didn't have the steak remade, I simply had the chef warm it up for a minute before bringing it back out. As the night wore on, I started to feel a pang of guilt. Was I taking things too far? But then I overheard Karen and her friends talking about me again. "He's cute," one of them said, "but I'd never date a waiter." "Like, what kind of ambition is that?" "Exactly," Karen chimed in. "Guys like that are fine for a fling, but you can't take them seriously. He probably still lives with his mom." That was the final straw. Any lingering doubts I had about teaching them a lesson disappeared. By the time they finished their meal, Karen and her friends had consumed a staggering amount of food and alcohol. Each of them had ordered multiple cocktails, expensive entrees, and desserts. They didn't seem to notice, or care, that the bill was growing astronomically. When I finally presented the check, it was a thing of beauty, $4,232.23, including tax and gratuity. Karen's smug expression disappeared the moment she saw the total. Her face went pale, and she blinked several times as if she couldn't believe what she was looking at. "Is this some kind of joke?" she demanded, waving the bill in my face. I took the check back, pretending to review it. "I'm so sorry," I said. "Let me make sure everything is correct." Karen exhaled in relief, clearly expecting the total to be adjusted. "I knew there was a mistake," she said, her voice regaining its haughty tone. I returned a moment later with the same bill. "I've double-checked everything, and it's all correct," I said. "I even removed the charge for the first 3 rounds of drinks, as promised." Karen's jaw dropped. "This can't be right," she exclaimed. "How could it possibly be this much?" "Well," I began, "you ordered some of our most premium items, including the oysters, truffle pasta, and lobster. And you did have quite a few drinks, those cocktails and the champagne really add up." Her friends started murmuring among themselves, their buzzed confidence rapidly evaporating. Karen turned to them, desperate. "We'll split it," she said. "Everyone pitch in." The Baby Karens looked at each other, panicked. "I thought you said you were covering it," one of them whispered. Karen glared at her. "Just give me whatever cash you have, and I'll figure out the rest." The girls rummaged through their purses, pulling out crumpled bills and loose change. It was clear they didn't have nearly enough to cover the total. Karen excused herself to the bathroom, muttering something about needing to figure this out. Karen disappeared into the restroom, leaving her entourage nervously whispering at the table. By now, the reality of the situation was beginning to sink in for the baby Karens. They were no longer giggling or snapping selfies. Instead, they looked panicked, shuffling through their bags and muttering about how much money they could contribute. She said she'd cover it, one of them hissed. Yeah, but she didn't know it'd be this much, another shot back. Well, what are we supposed to do? I don't have that kind of money. I watched the scene unfold from a distance, trying not to smirk. Karen, meanwhile, was taking her sweet time in the bathroom. I suspected she was trying to come up with a plan, or maybe she was just hiding, hoping this problem would magically resolve itself. 10 minutes later, she returned, her face freshly powdered and her eyes slightly red, as though she'd been crying. She took a deep breath and plastered on a fake smile, as if trying to regain control of the situation. Okay, she said, addressing me directly. There's clearly been a mistake. The food was not worth this price, and the service was, she paused, searching for the right word. Subpar, at best. I raised an eyebrow. I'm sorry to hear that, ma'am. If there was an issue with the service or the food, you should have mentioned it earlier. I would have been happy to address your concerns. Karen waved a hand dismissively. I didn't want to make a scene at the time, but honestly, the lobster was dry, and the steak was overcooked. And the drinks were way too strong. Strong drinks usually get compliments, I replied, keeping my tone polite. But I understand. Unfortunately, since you finished all of the food and drinks without raising these concerns earlier, I can't make adjustments to the bill. Karen's facade cracked. You don't get it, she snapped. I know the owner. He wouldn't want me to pay this ridiculous amount. Just call him, and he'll straighten this out. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I smiled and said, of course, ma'am. If you'd like, I can call the owner right now and explain the situation. Her eyes widened slightly, and I could see the panic setting in. No. I mean, there's no need to bother him. I'll just text him myself. She pulled out her phone and began furiously typing. I watched with amusement as she crafted what I assumed was a fake conversation with the owner. After a few minutes, she held up her phone triumphantly. See, she said, showing me the screen. The message thread was with someone saved in her contacts as owner, restaurant name. The messages were hilariously fake, filled with lines like, Karen, my dear friend, you're always welcome here. Don't worry about the bill, I'll take care of it. I stared at the screen for a moment before asking, do you mind if I see the contact info for this number? Karen hesitated, but she couldn't refuse without looking suspicious. She handed me the phone, and I tapped on the contact details. Sure enough, the number was obviously fake. It wasn't even close to my actual number. I handed the phone back to her. That's not the owner's number, ma'am, I said. Her face flushed red. He has multiple numbers for business purposes, she stammered. You wouldn't know all of them. Actually, I would, I said, my tone firm. Because I am the owner. For a moment, there was complete silence. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The baby Karens stared at me in shock, clearly unsure of what to do. I've been the owner of this restaurant for years, I continued. My grandparents started it, and it's been in my family ever since. I've worked here for most of my life. So no, you don't know me, and I certainly never promised you a free table. Karen's bravado crumbled. She looked down at the bill, then back at me. This is ridiculous, she muttered. You can't expect me to pay this. I absolutely do, I replied. You ordered premium dishes, consumed an excessive amount of alcohol, and enjoyed the VIP experience. If you refuse to pay, I'll have no choice but to contact the authorities. And since I have your credit card and ID on file, it won't be hard to press charges. Karen's eyes filled with tears. Please, she whispered. Can't you just lower the bill? At least take off the drinks or something? I shook my head. No. I've already been more than generous. Remember, I gave you 3 rounds of drinks for free and didn't charge you the VIP booking fee. That's a discount worth hundreds of dollars. You still owe $4,232.23. Karen looked at her friends, silently pleading for their help. One of the baby Karens sighed and pulled out a wad of cash. Here, she said, handing over a couple $100. The others followed suit, contributing whatever they could. But even with their combined efforts, they were still far short of the total. Realizing she had no other options, Karen reluctantly handed me her credit card. Fine, she muttered. Just charge it. I ran the card, and to her credit, it didn't decline. As I handed it back to her, she glared at me with a mix of anger and humiliation. You're a terrible person, she spat. I'm just running my business, I replied calmly. Have a good night. Karen and her entourage left the restaurant in silence, their earlier laughter and arrogance completely extinguished. 2 days later, the story took an unexpected turn when a man, Karen's father, showed up at the restaurant. 2 days after the disastrous evening, I was in my office reviewing the schedule when one of my bartenders came to the door. There's a man here who wants to speak to you, she said, looking a little uneasy. Who is he? I asked. He says he's the father of that Karen woman from the other night. I frowned but told her to send him back. Moments later, a middle-aged man stormed into my office, followed closely by Karen herself. She looked like a completely different person, her hair was tied back, her makeup was minimal, and her usual air of superiority had been replaced by quiet dread. Are you the owner? The man demanded, his voice sharp. Yes, I said, standing to greet him. How can I help you? The man wasted no time getting to the point. My daughter told me about what happened here the other night. She said you charged her an outrageous amount for dinner and humiliated her in front of her friends. I want to know what the hell is going on. Before I could respond, Karen jumped in. Dad, I told you, it wasn't my fault. Stop, he said, holding up a hand. Let him explain. I gestured for them to sit, though Karen remained standing, clearly uncomfortable. Her father took a seat across from me, his expression hard. Well, he said. Sir, I began, your daughter and her friends came into my restaurant without a reservation, claiming to know the owner, me, and demanding one of our VIP tables. Despite being fully booked, I accommodated them because I wanted to avoid a scene. Karen shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. I gave them the VIP table without charging the booking fee, I continued. I also comped the first 3 rounds of drinks as a courtesy. After that, they proceeded to order some of the most expensive items on our menu and consumed an excessive amount of alcohol. When the bill arrived, your daughter refused to pay and claimed I had made a mistake. Her father's expression darkened. Is this true? He asked, looking at Karen. She avoided his gaze. He's exaggerating, she muttered. We didn't know the table was VIP, and the food wasn't even that good. I pulled up the security footage on my computer. If you'd like, I can show you exactly what happened, I offered. Karen's face went pale. That's not necessary, she blurted out. Her father narrowed his eyes at her. Play it. I clicked play on the footage from that night. The high-quality audio captured everything, Karen's bragging about knowing the owner, her condescending remarks to the staff, and her dismissive attitude when I tried to explain the situation. The piece de resistance was her attempt to show me fake text messages from the owner, which her father watched with increasing fury. When the video ended, he turned to Karen, his face a mixture of anger and disappointment. You lied to me, he said quietly. Dad, Save it, he snapped. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Not just for you, but for me? I raised you better than this. Karen looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. Her father turned back to me. I apologize for her behavior, he said. How much was the bill? $4, $232.23, I replied. He winced but nodded. Did she pay it? Yes, she did, I said. With her credit card. I also made sure to include a gratuity for the staff, considering how she treated them. Good, he said. He stood and looked at Karen. We're leaving. Now. Karen followed him out of the office, her head hanging low. Before they reached the door, her father turned back to me. Again, I'm sorry for all of this. I'll be having a very long conversation with my daughter about respect and responsibility. I nodded. Thank you for coming in. I hope things work out. After they left, I went back to work, feeling a sense of closure. The framed copy of Karen's $4,232.23 bill still sits on my desk, a reminder of the night I stood my ground. The experience taught me an important lesson about running a business. Sometimes, you have to deal with entitled people, but it's how you handle those situations that defines you. As for Karen, I haven't seen her or her friends since that night. I like to think her father's stern words had some impact on her behavior, but who knows? People like her rarely change overnight. What I do know is that every time I look at that framed bill, I feel a small sense of satisfaction. Running a restaurant isn't always easy, but moments like this make it all worth it.